Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field. This episode is brought to you by L1 Automotive Training and Keith Perkins. If you're looking for education on module programming, J2534, EEPROM work, key and immobilizer, electrical diagnostics, or drivability diagnostics, Keith has a website, l1training.com, that's got over 60 hours of training videos on all those subjects and more. When I first started out doing mobile, I utilized Keith's videos on module programming in J2534 in order to get my head wrapped around what I would need for the tooling, the computers, the software setups, what kind of obstacles I would be up against when I'm out there programming modules on cars. And it was a huge benefit to me. And I continue to use the training videos that he has on his website. So I strongly recommend checking out l1training.com. The link is in the show notes. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping, and I'll be your host once again for this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. Just me on the show this week, and I'm going to dive into round two of the discussion I was having last week based on using AI tools and LLMs within my business and repairing and diagnosing vehicles in general. Now, I had a couple good conversations with people over the last week based on the first episode I put out, so I wanted to expand on a couple topics that I thought was pretty relevant and maybe things I didn't touch on or go in depth enough to, but then also having, talks spurs some, different ideas that I wanted to get out there. So anyways, we'll jump into this today, again, kind of be an expansion on what we talked about last week, and we'll see where it goes from there. I don't mean to overload on AI. There's a lot of other things to consider, but like I mentioned last week, it's such a powerful tool that I've been able to utilize and that I'm learning as I go within my day-to-day job in the cars that I'm fixing, that it's hard not to talk about it. And, for everybody who listens to the show, right, and we're all out there diagnosing vehicles, or at least most people listen to the show, that's you're doing that at least some portion of your job. I don't see why you wouldn't start to utilize some of these tools to help you out and increase your throughput and your productivity. But anyways, let's get into the topics today of what I wanted to expand on. So one of the things that I want to make, really clear that is an important thing to think about as you use these LLMs to help you either understand a topic or just get the information in general, is when we're putting a prompt in, we're asking it to either do something for us or provide us with some sort of information or confirmation of information that we're trying to figure out. And I'll give you a few examples here, but a lot of times you hop on ChatGPT and you ask it a question, right? How does this work? Where do I find this? Where do I go to execute this task, right? Or can you execute this task? Can you take this bin file from this EEPROM that I just read and find me the mileage, okay? Or VIN number or immobilizer data or whatever, right? And by the way, you can put bin files in there, and it's actually pretty cool to play around with it. But here's the thing, it's not always going to be right. And again, I mentioned that last week. It says at the bottom of the prompt for the OpenAI model, I think most of them say that, is they'll give you wrong answers, right? And so a lot of the idea around this is you just put an input in and you get, instant, accurate expertise or feedback or information that should be 100% accurate in regards to whatever you're asking it to output. And it's just definitely 100% not true. you're going to get, you might get right information, but you very well could get inaccurate information or incomplete information out of it. And I think most people that use it understand that, but I've just seen a lot of when people ask it a question, it gets it wrong. It's like, see, this thing is, useless. And there's no, reason that you should be using this day to day because it's completely inaccurate. And it definitely can be 100%. But the way that I think about this when I use this and I get an output from an LLM, and there's some stuff that goes into the prompting. I'll expand more on that as well because the prompting matters. The context of information that it has to reference matters. But what I think about this output of the LLM as is just plausible information that requires some human discernment. Okay. The output that it gets could be the correct information. It could lead me in the right direction, but it really requires some human discernment to see, is this relevant and accurate to the situation, to the context that I'm utilizing it for. Okay. Now, this is where it is really beneficial to already be an expert in the subject matter in which you are asking it questions about, or to have a really in-depth understanding of what you're working with or what the expected outcome might be when you're asking it questions relevant to diagnosing a car, reading a bin file out of an EEPROM, looking at a picture of a circuit board and saying, hey, is that an EEPROM or not? And if you have no cursory knowledge, like you have nothing coming into it, you're a complete beginner. One of the problems about large language models and the outputs that they give is they sound very confident, right? The grammar and the spelling is perfect. They give you an abundance of text. They're very wordy unless you tell them to be otherwise, right? It's so much information that's spit out instantly. And you're like, wow, that, how could this be wrong? It's so confident. Even if you don't think that, the product that's directly output to you, especially compared to your, let's just say your average human output that you might get on a Facebook post to a question, right? The comparison is completely different. And so you're like, wow, this really seems right, right? It just inspires confidence based on how it's presented to you in the output. Okay, so what I'm saying is if you are a complete beginner, you could be just baffled by bullshit, right? That's the old phrase that you'd hear in like sales settings. I remember this clearly. I worked at a Northern Tool for a period of time, and they wanted me out on the floor selling, water pumps and zero turn lawnmowers and stuff like that. And I was pretty young, and I'm like, I don't know anything about half of this stuff. And I remember the salesman, who was the top salesman there, he did very well for himself. He's like, I don't know most of these things either. He's like, I just put on a show, and I've been doing this long enough that I can look at a product and I can just baffle them with some information. Now, is that right? No. But the fact of the matter is, he did really well. He was the number one salesman at that store for a very long time for a reason, is he was able to BS his way through it, right? So what I'm saying is the presentation of the output to someone can fool you into, thinking that, wow, this person is very competent, right? I think Fonslow's talked about it several times, the competence and confidence correlation, right? If you are confident in your response or your answer, you're going to seem more competent, even if you aren't necessarily. And that's, again, the effect that you might be experiencing here. But so if you have no background knowledge about that, if you don't know anything about that zero turn lawnmower and that guy is just spouting off facts that are complete BS, but he does it with a ton of confidence, you're going to believe him. Say, yep, that sounds great. I am convinced, right? And so that's what we get a lot with these outputs from LLMs. Now, does that mean that they're, intentionally deceiving us? No, it's just that it's designed to give you an output. Now, with that being said, there are ways that you can instruct it to be more accurate. You can give it specific instructions within projects to say, the information that you provide it's critical that you give me the accurate information, or ask questions to me if you need more context in order to get me the accurate information, or just tell me that you don't know or the information's not available if you're not 100% sure. So you can dial this in that regard, but I haven't necessarily done that except for very specific prompts that I'm asking about. I would rather see what it gives me, and then use my knowledge and expertise coming into the situation to assess whether that output is accurate, whether it's relevant, and whether I need to question this more or look further into it. And being an expert, and of course that term is going to be subjective, but having a wealth of knowledge in a specific area is going to be so beneficial to you using these tools, right? This is going to, it shouldn't be replacing your thinking. It should be amplifying your thinking. But in order to do that, you have to have some of that knowledge coming in the door. And that makes these tools so much more useful if you can call BS on that answer, right? Or enough to say, well, hey, wait a second, what about this? And then it will come back and it will do some more research, and maybe it can't find what you're looking for, right? And that's the other piece of this, is it's only as good as the information that it has access to. But maybe you didn't ask the question correctly, or you didn't give it enough context. And here is where you can actually use the LLM to help you understand how to prompt correctly. And prompting is so important. I think they have entire jobs around prompt engineering for people to be able to give it the right context, to ask it the right questions, and you get answers that are worlds better than if you just gave it a simple question with no context. Let me give you an example here. This was one that we did the other day. That was radio out of an '07 Cadillac Escalade, and TLC wouldn't do the VIN rewrite, so it showed up as locked. Usually you can just do an update to these radios, and it'll change the software, and then it'll write the VIN at the same time. This one didn't want to go through that way, and we tried. So we're like, okay, just pull the radio out, and we'll find the EEPROM, we'll swap it over, and it'll be good to go, because that's where the VIN is stored in a lot of GM radios. And I had some information on a newer Escalade radio and where the EEPROM chip was. Turned out the innards of this one were a little bit different. And I actually had my intern working on this while I was gone. He's really into the board work, so we're kind of just letting him have at it. But he's still learning, and I didn't have any specific info on chip location on this specific board. But he finds one that, very well could be an EEPROM based on the location of it and the fact that it's an 8-leg chip that, physically looks like the EEPROMs that we're used to, but the markings on it don't signify a typical EEPROM family, right? Like you'd see a 24, 25, or 93, something like that. It didn't have those markings, but it was close to the processor, right? So these are all things that we look at when we're looking on the board. Like, let's find the processor. Okay, let's look around it for any of these 8-leg chips, and then we'll see, is this an EEPROM? Because the odds are likely that it is. Now, radios can be a little different. I have found on some GM radios that the EEPROM location is not as close to the processor as you would expect. And quite often in GM radios, the number that's used on the EEPROM it doesn't correlate to a typical EEPROM family. Okay. Now, all that stuff I just said, that's previous experience that I have coming into this job. I've cloned a number of GM radios. I've found the EEPROMs with some help from other people, with trial and error, with Googling the numbers on the chip and finding stuff in forums to know that, okay, it might be near the processor, but it might not. And when we find it, it might have the normal EEPROM family markings that we're used to, or it might not. That's all really important information that I need coming into this. And I'll show you why. Like, we're using this with ChatGPT, and try this. Take a picture of a circuit board that you're working on, right? And you try to get the markings clear, because it will be able to pick the text out of the picture once you put it in. And then you can ask it like, hey, is this an EEPROM? Which is exactly the question I gave it when I put this question into ChatGPT. Now, I'm talking about using good prompts here. The reason I didn't do very good of a prompt or didn't give it a whole lot of context or information, so that I was out of town. I was trying to help via text, help my intern figure out if this is the EEPROM chip that we need to swap or not. So he sends me a picture of it. I pop it into ChatGPT and I just say, is this an EEPROM? Now, it may be able to figure that out, especially if it has a marking on it like 24 series or 93 series or whatever. This one did not. The number on it was 28033-204, and then there was a couple other markings underneath it, SN0653. Those aren't your typical like EEPROM family markings, but I put it in there. I said, is this an EEPROM? Okay. And ChatGPT says, looking at your photo, the 8-pin IC marked, it gives me the text that's on there. So I know at least I can verify at that point that at least it can properly read the text that's printed on the top of the chip. It says it is not an EEPROM, and not an EEPROM is in bold, right? So it's very confident that this is not an EEPROM. It says that package and numbering style belongs to a Texas Instruments regulator driver IC family in the SN prefix. It looks like a power management IC or a driver, not a memory device. And then it goes on to say a few points. EEPROMs usually have an identifier like 24C02 or 93C66 or 95020, often with an AT, ST, or M prefix, which is 100% accurate. It's not giving me inaccurate information there. That's all true. Now, this chip doesn't, but again, previous experience tells me that some of these GM radio EEPROMs have this type of mask on there, if you will. I don't know if this is technically considered a mask, but it's not the typical markings that you would see. It doesn't mean it's not an EEPROM. And then it goes on to tell me more about the ways that they're typically identified and what the numbers mean, right? That like 16 would stand 16 kilobytes or kilobits, sorry. So it says, based on this is not an EEPROM. And then it goes on to say, take a bigger picture of the board and we'll see if we can identify either, what chip might be the EEPROM or if there is one located on this board. And there were other spots on the board, but again, I'm actually thinking that this might be the EEPROM for this radio. And I'm not 100% convinced based off of this output that ChatGPT gave me. Now, if I knew nothing about EEPROMs, all I knew is I was looking for an 8-leg chip, and that's about it. And I took a picture of this, and I got this, and I saw it in bold. This is not an EEPROM. I'd more likely be convinced that is correct, and I would move on, and I would start looking at other things to try to find this, if this LLM is my main resource for this information. And luckily it's not. Luckily, again, I have previous experience with these, and you can still do some Google searching here, and Google search isn't dead. There's still a lot of really good information out on the internet. And I was actually able to find a forum that listed this chip in reference to the model that I was working on, Cadillac Escalade, and the radio, and it even said what line of the hex the VIN number was on. So you could go in and you could just edit the VIN number if you wanted to. You didn't necessarily have to swap the chip. I, in a lot of cases with these, just prefer to swap the entire chip rather than trying to edit things. Just in the weird case that you run into some, checksum error. Not the case on GM radios that I've experienced, but you never know. I think it's just easier, especially when I'm having, my new guy do it. Just swap the chip. I know that he's capable of that. Anyways, off in the weeds there. But this show is brought to you by Auto Rescue Tools and Isaac Rodell. If you've been looking for a programming laptop, but you're not sure which one to buy or how to set it up, especially if you want to program multiple brands, you've got some domestic vehicles, you've got European vehicles. Can the same software go on the same laptop? What size hard drive do I need? All those questions. Isaac's your guy. He can custom set up programming laptops that are ready to tackle any make or model. I've got one of these laptops myself, and I can say that it is outstanding, and it really streamlines the process by having everything you need in one device. So if you're looking for something like that, I highly recommend checking out autorescuetools.com. You'll also find scan tools, diagnostic equipment, key cutting equipment, and much more. Check out the link in the show notes. I highly recommend it. I look and I keep searching, and I find out that, this is an EEPROM. I actually just Googled that top number, and that's what got me to the forum. And that's okay. Pretty good confidence when we find another one that says, yes, this exact number is an EEPROM. It told me the family, okay, this is it. So we swapped it, and it worked, and that unlocked the radio so it could work in this Escalade. Didn't fix this problem, by the way, but not our diagnostic. So anyways, I went back to this prompt that I had, and I said, hey, turns out this was an EEPROM. It's for an '07 Cadillac Escalade radio, which I didn't give it that context before. But I asked it what information or what context or what way could I ask this question to you that would be more likely that you would give me an accurate answer, right? Because what it gave me was inaccurate. Now, it doesn't have reference to the information potentially. Now, it was out there on the web, so could it find it? Maybe. But what I want to know is directly from the horse's mouth, how can I ask better questions of you? And this is kind of like the secret sauce here, is you can use the tool to figure out how to use the tool better. And I mean, there's stuff like that out there, right? You can read users manuals for stuff, but this is just completely on a different level where you can become so much better educated at the use of a tool by asking it, how do I use you better? What information could you have had to get a better outcome here? And it gives me a whole bunch of awesome information for prompting so that it can get the correct answer or get me closer to a correct answer. It says it doesn't have universal, reliable access to all proprietary or remarked component databases and chip markings, and says that chip markings can be wildly inconsistent. Goes on to say, okay, well, how do you get accurate information next time that we go through this? Here's how you stack the deck in your favor, it says. Number one, provide as much functional context as possible. So it gives me an example prompt here of how I should have asked the question. Because I just said, is this an EEPROM? This chip is from a 2007 GM Delphi radio board. It's an 8-pin SOIC located near the microcontroller and crystal, likely a serial memory. Now that might be leading it a little bit, but this is the example prompt it gave me. And then marking is 28033-204. It just has me read out the chip. It was able to do that. Can you identify it or its most probable equivalent? Okay. And it says this context anchors the model to EEPROM type reasoning and increases accurately significantly. Now, you can lead this a little too much. You could go in and say, hey, I know this is an EEPROM. Will you tell me which one it is? And that's probably not the best way to do it either. You want to leave it open-ended so that it can tell you if you're wrong, right? But there's a lot more context there. I could have told it what this was out of, saying, hey, this is out of an '07 Cadillac Escalade radio. This is near the processor. It's on this board. I think this is the EEPROM. Some of these EEPROM chips that I've seen in GM radios are not marked with the traditional markings. Can you help me verify that this is an EEPROM or not? That would be a way better way to ask this question. Okay. And so this is what I'm talking about here with asking the correct question is going to help immensely in getting a better answer and learning how to do that, right? So if it comes up with something that you're like, oh, this is a complete BS answer, and again, you have to have the wherewithal to know that that's the case, but you run into that, then you just ask it, okay, well, here is what the answer was once you actually figure it out, however you do that. How could I have prompted this better to get this outcome? And then you can learn as you go how to utilize this tool better, okay? So there's a lot going on here. Again, that existing knowledge base coming into utilizing this tool is so critical, which means you still have to learn all this stuff yourself. You still have to be the expert if you want to use this in an expert setting and at an expert level. You got to be the expert of the subject matter coming in so you can call BS. So that really confident person in front of you spewing BS, you can say, nope, that is not correct, right? And we have to do this in the real world too, by the way. If you've ever watched a YouTube video or been to a class and you're like, okay, that guy's real confident, but I call BS on this, right? We've all experienced that. I know I have. But again, I've also been a beginner and been sitting in that same class. I'm like, wow, this guy is just a freaking rocket scientist. I'll never be on his level. The stuff he's doing is so crazy complex. How does he even, well, it turns out a lot of it was just, showmanship, right? It's, again, that confidence that baffled me with bullshit. Okay. So again, you have to have that level of understanding of the topic in order to make that call. It's the same thing here. So, in my opinion, it's not a whole lot different between attending normal training, getting it from another human, watching a YouTube video, listening to a podcast, by the way, and using one of these LLMs. Now, the better thing here is if I'm asking the LLM, how do I get a better answer out of you versus asking the really confident instructor, like, hey, I call BS on that. How do I get a better answer out of you next time? I don't know the response that you're going to get from that person putting on that class. Try it out. Let me know how it goes. I'd be curious. But the other piece of getting great outputs from this is the information that it has available to it. Now, these have been trained on the internet and a whole lot of other things. Some of the new models are using synthetic data in order to train their models. I don't even really understand exactly how that works, but I heard an interview and, one of the creators or owners of one of these companies is saying basically, we ran out of data to train this on. We've trained it on everything that is out there. Now we've got to make synthetic data to train it further. That's wild to even conceive. But my thoughts on it at a very, very basic level is there's a lot of information behind paywalls, or there's even a lot of information that's just not documented, or a lot of information that just doesn't exist, right? A specific, unique situation, right? Those one-off problems that you'll never see again. That's not documented anywhere because maybe nobody's ever experienced it before, right? So there's a lack of information on the backside in one way or another. And so the number one, the understanding that there is, a lack of information in some cases, but then taking an extra step to make sure that it does have access to the information that you're looking for. Now, I mentioned last week you could do a deep research or web mode when you're doing your searches, and that gives it, I think, more of a concentrated effort to find the information and the details that you're looking for rather than the quick, 10-second search that you normally get from the prompt window. Now, it takes, 5 to 10 minutes, so you're, 10xing the search time for a specific topic, but the output that you get, I think, is going to be significantly better, more detailed, thoroughly researched. So I didn't try it, but had I put that picture in there and did a deep research mode, I think it's more likely that it would have come back with the correct answer. It might have found that forum that I did when I Google searched the number on the EEPROM chip. It's been my experience using the deep research mode that it is more likely to find those little bits of information out there that don't come up within the first search. It's kind of like, if you want to think of it like this, like the regular prompt to an LLM is going to be like looking at the first page of Google, where a deep research mode is going to look through 100 pages of Google after that search and go through every single website. That's my best analogy to the difference between the two. But you only get so many of those deep research prompts per month. It depends on your pay plan and all that stuff. And it does take more time. So I'll kind of save them for something. I'm like, okay, I need this thing to dig on some info for me. Find me whatever you can on this particular topic. I had a code in a BMW the other day that I had never seen before, and it was sort of vague on what it meant, but it was in a limp mode for the engine. It would basically hit a rev limiter, and it was only a code in the DME, and it said energy saving mode, but I didn't quite understand what that meant at the time. And all data and identifix, nothing on there, like nothing. It just told you that code doesn't exist. And it turns out you just had to turn it off of transport mode, but that's where I found that information out, because I hadn't run into that before, typically a BMW technician, and the deep research mode is what ended up finding that for me. So you can utilize that again to dig for some more information. But another thing is, give it the specific information that you would like it to reference. Now, this doesn't always work, because if you're searching, you're trying to figure something out, maybe you don't have access to said information, but maybe you do, right? Maybe you have a PDF of a owner's manual or user's manual for a particular software or product. Maybe you can get the description and operation. Maybe you can get the DTC set criteria, right? Things like that you can feed into this and say, hey, reference this particular information. Or maybe you've built up your own library of information on some sort of internal drive or database, and there are ways you can link it up. And I'm just working with this right now, getting this figured out with the business model. And I mentioned that last week. Do be aware, if you're just using the regular public model, it'll train on your data, and it's potential that that information is going out for everybody to use. I don't quite understand the privacy behind it, if any. I think I listened to Sam Altman talk in a podcast about how, people put some really private stuff on here, and maybe it's not necessarily so private. So yeah, do be aware of that. But at least with the business model, it says right at the bottom, it does not train other models on your data. So it's self-contained. I hope, that I'm trusting that information is contained, because here's the deal. We have worked really hard, and maybe you have as well, to build up a bulk of data based on what we do: diagnostics, ADAS, keys, programming. And we were broken down by manufacturer, by model line, by year, by type of problem, by type of module or ADAS system. And their notes right from the field, right? We had this code, here's the problem. We couldn't calibrate this radar, here's why. This key wouldn't program to this system. Oh, there's two different FCC IDs. Here's how we figured out what the right one was. That sort of stuff, where maybe it's out there. Usually if we're writing it down in our drive, it means we weren't able to find this information elsewhere. Okay, so can I link that bulk of data to the LLM and now integrate those two things together? I've just started being able to do that. Now, where I'm going with that is the information that it has access to is completely different than just going out onto Google, right? Now, this is a ton of work. If you don't have a bulk of data stored up, like you don't have that, you're not gonna be able to do this tomorrow. But maybe you can start tomorrow and start saving stuff, and then work towards that. But I'll tell you what, it's so impressive what it can do with the correct information, right? And I've been really impressed with that piece of it. So asking it the right question, prompting it the right way, giving it the correct information in order to reference to give you the best output possible. And then also just understanding that, hey, some of this can be BS, but you can call it on it. But you kind of have to be that expert going in order to do that, to be suspicious of the answer, right? I mean, I guess you could be suspicious of it just in general and ask it more questions, like poke and prod it a little bit. Be like, are you sure? Tell me why you're sure. Give me a 100% confident answer in regards to this and see what it says, right? Again, that's the other thing. You're not going to bruise its ego by saying, hey, I think you're wrong. It'll just, either agree with you, or maybe it'll explain why it thinks it's right in this situation. And all of that should also be considered if you're going to use it for education, which I mentioned last week as well. You can use this to learn about specific topics or help you educate yourself in specific areas. And you can use a back and forth, like with a voice mode, or again, you can just talk into this thing. It's 100% the best way to go. Just use the voice transcription, and it's amazing how quickly you can get information back and forth. And again, when I talk and I give it prompts, I can give it an annoying amount of detail, but that's better for the outcome. That increases the quality of the prompt and the quality of the outcome. The more context I give it, when I talk, I can and get all kinds of stuff out there, just like I'm doing now. But when you're using this to help you educate yourself on a specific topic, you just want to be aware, again, that it's only as good as the information that it has access to. So here's an example of where you could potentially use this to relate to our career, right? Most of us have ASE certifications, right? And so we study for the test so we can pass the test. This is something where you can give it the exact information that it needs and say, hey, here's the composite vehicle, or here's the A1 outline for the engine repair test, right? And you can get those right from ASE. It tells you all the topics they cover, or with the L1 test, right? Or what is the ADAS one? Is that L3, L4, one of those two? You can give it the composite vehicle from that and say, hey, start quizzing me on the systems on this particular composite vehicle. Now you're giving it the specific information, and then you're asking it, hey, quiz me till I understand what's going on here. Do it in multiple choice format. And if you want to do it like the test, and then help me understand if I get a question wrong, why I got it wrong. And it's going to be excellent at something like that. And you can use it as much as you want, right? If you're going to do a practice test online, traditionally with these ASE tests, you're going to be paying all kinds of money for like 10 questions that are probably 10 years old too. But something like that where you can give it the exact info. I want to get better at this text, right? This specific topic. It's an excellent tool. If you're not feeding it, specific exact information, then, well, maybe you don't know where it's getting from. You should be a little bit more cautious on it, but it can be used as a learning tool as well if you are not super confident in a particular area going in. So that's where I'm going to end this one here today. I'm sure you're plenty tired of hearing me talk about AI, so we'll shift topics going into next week, but this is stuff that I wanted to expand on based on conversations that I had with people last week. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for the input on the topic. I find it really interesting, obviously. Hopefully you do too. Hopefully you learned something over the last couple of weeks in the episodes, and maybe we'll have some more in the future based on uses that I find and input from you guys out there. So that's it for now. Just want to say thank you for listening again, and let's get out there, start fixing the world one car at a time.